Tonight, as you settle into your blankets and let the weight of the day slip away, I want to take you back to a night I have carried with me for nearly 18 years. A night when the lights went out across Europe, and I learned what it truly means to find your way in the darkness. I was 34 years old that November, a single mother, a night shift nurse at a regional hospital in Münster, a quiet university city in the heart of Germany, where the autumn leaves had just finished falling and the first breath of winter was settling over the land. Even now, all these years later, I can still feel the cold that crept through my coat that night. I can still smell the freezing rain as it turned the roads to glass. I can still hear the silence, that strange, absolute silence that falls when every machine, every hum, every electric heartbeat simply stops. It was the evening of November 4th, 2006. I did not know it then, but what happened that night would become the worst power outage in European history. 15 million people plunged into darkness across Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and Austria. And I was one of them. But my story is not about numbers or statistics. My story is about a choice I had to make between the strangers who needed me at the hospital and my elderly mother, who lived alone in a farmhouse 40 kilometers away, her mind slowly fading to dementia, with no one to check on her, no way to call for help, and no heat as the temperature dropped below freezing. What I needed most that night was to be in two places at once. And when I realized I could not, I had to decide, who do I protect when I cannot protect everyone? In my pocket, I carried a wind-up flashlight and radio that had belonged to my father, a lineman for the electrical company, who spent his life keeping the lights on for others. He had given it to me before he passed. That night, it became my only connection to information, to light, to hope. I have thought about that night many times over the years. I have wondered if I made the right choice. I have replayed the moments when I could have turned back, when I could have stayed where I was safe, when I could have trusted that someone else would reach her in time. But I did not turn back. I walked into the darkness and I kept walking until I found her. That is the story I want to tell you tonight. Not a story of heroes or grand rescues. I am neither of those things. Just a story of one ordinary woman who loved her mother, who trusted her father's light, and who discovered that even when everything goes dark, there are still people willing to help you find your way. So let me take you back to where it all began. Close your eyes if you like. Breathe slowly. Let your body grow heavy and warm, and let me tell you how I survived the night the lights went out. It started, as most extraordinary nights do, with a perfectly ordinary afternoon. I remember the afternoon before everything changed as clearly as I remember my daughter's face the day she was born. Some moments burn themselves into your memory, not because they seem important at the time, but because everything that comes after gives them weight. It was a Saturday, November 4th. The sky had been gray all day, the kind of gray that settles over northern Germany in late autumn and does not lift until spring. I had woken at 2 in the afternoon, as I always did before a night shift, and I had spent the quiet hours doing small, forgettable things, folding laundry, packing my daughter Lena's overnight bag, making a cup of tea that I let grow cold on the counter. Lena was 8 years old then, a bright, serious child with her father's dark hair and my mother's stubborn chin. She was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing pictures of horses, as she always did when she was waiting for something. "Mama," she said without looking up, "do you have to work tonight?" It was a question she asked every time, though she already knew the answer. "I do, little one," I said, running my fingers through her hair. "But Frau Zimmermann will take good care of you, and I will be home before you wake up tomorrow." She nodded, still drawing. She had learned long ago that some things could not be negotiated. Some things simply were. I drove her to our neighbor's apartment at 5 o'clock, just as the last pale light was fading from the sky. Frau Zimmermann was a widow in her 60s, a retired school teacher who treated Lena like a granddaughter and never accepted payment for watching her. She met us at the door with the smell of fresh cookies drifting from her kitchen. "Go on," she said to me, her hand already on Lena's shoulder. "We have puzzles to finish and stories to read. She will not even notice you are gone." But Lena noticed. She always noticed. She hugged me tightly at the door, her small arms wrapped around my waist, her face pressed against my coat. "Come home safe, Mama," she whispered. "And I always do," I said. And then I drove through the darkening streets toward the hospital, and I did not think about those words again until much later, when I was standing alone in the cold and the darkness, wondering if I would be able to keep that promise. The hospital where I worked was called the Clemench Hospital. It was an old building, rebuilt after the war, with long corridors that echoed and windows that let in drafts no matter how many times maintenance sealed them. I had worked there for 9 years, first in the general ward, then in the intensive care unit, then finally on the geriatric floor, where I discovered that I had a gift for caring for the elderly. Perhaps it was because of my mother. Perhaps I was practicing for what I knew was coming. I arrived at 5:30 and made my way through the familiar halls. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that constant hum that I had long ago stopped hearing. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the cafeteria's dinner service, something with cabbage by the scent of it. Nurses passed me with quick nods. Orderlies pushed carts of linens. Somewhere a patient called out for water, and somewhere else a television played the evening news. It was all so ordinary, so unremarkable. The machinery of the hospital grinding along as it always did, powered by electricity we never thought about and people we rarely thanked. I stopped at my locker in the break room and changed into my uniform. The room was empty except for Bridget, a fellow nurse who worked the same shift. She was sitting at the small table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. "Weather's turning," she said without looking up. "They say there might be freezing rain tonight." I nodded, hanging my coat in the locker. My mother is alone out there. I should have driven out yesterday to check on her. Bridget looked up then. She was a solid woman in her mid-50s, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of calm that comes from 30 years of nursing. She had seen everything. Nothing surprised her anymore. "Your mother made it through last winter," she said. "She will be fine." "Last winter, she still remembered to light the stove," I replied. "Last month, she forgot my name twice." Bridget set down her newspaper. "Have you thought more about the care facility?" I had thought about it. I had thought about it every day for 6 months. But every time I visited my mother, she walked me through the farmhouse and showed me the kitchen where she had learned to cook, the bedroom where she had been born, the view from the window that she had looked at for 78 years. How could I take her away from that? I am not ready, I said. She is not ready. Bridget nodded slowly. She did not argue, she understood. I reached into my locker and pulled out the small bag I always brought to work. Inside was my father's wind-up flashlight and radio, a heavy, old-fashioned thing that he had carried every day for 30 years as a lineman for the electrical company. The casing was dented in 3 places. The crank was stiff from years of use, but it still worked. It always worked. I did not know why I brought it to work that night. I usually left it at home, on the bookshelf beside his photograph. But that morning, something had made me slip it into my bag. Perhaps some part of me already knew what was coming. "Ready?" Bridget asked, standing and stretching her back. "Ready," I said, though I was not sure that was true. We walked out together into the corridor, and the hospital swallowed us in its ordinary rhythms. And for the next 4 hours, I forgot about the weather and my mother and the strange weight in my bag. The shift began like any other. I made my rounds, checking on the 12 patients in my section. There was Herr Kaufman, 83, recovering from a hip replacement, who always asked me to adjust his pillow exactly 7 times before he was satisfied. There was Frau Vogt, 79, with a heart condition that kept her tethered to a monitor, who liked to tell me stories about her late husband's flower shop. There was Herr Dreyer, 91, who rarely spoke but whose eyes followed me with such intensity that I always made sure to hold his hand for a moment before I moved on. They were not just patients to me. They were people with histories as deep as oceans, with loves and losses that stretched back decades before I was born. When I looked at them, I saw my mother. When I cared for them, I was caring for her. At 8 o'clock, I took my break and called the farmhouse. The phone rang 6 times before my mother answered. "Hello," her voice was thin, uncertain. "Mama, it's me, it's Ingrid." A pause, then with more warmth. "Ingrid, yes, how are you, dear?" "I am at work, Mama. I just wanted to check on you. Is everything all right?" Another pause, longer this time. "What day is it?" My heart tightened. "It is Saturday, Mama, November 4th. "November," she repeated slowly. "It is getting cold." "And did you light the stove?" "The stove?" She sounded confused. "I do not. I think your father said he would do it when he comes home." I closed my eyes. My father had been dead for 3 years. "Mama, listen to me. I need you to go to the kitchen and check if the stove is lit. Can you do that?" I heard the shuffle of her slippers on the wooden floor, the creak of the kitchen door. Then her voice, distant from the receiver. "It is not lit. It is cold in here." "All right, Mama. Do you remember how to light it? The matches are in the drawer by the sink." "Matches," she murmured. "Yes, I remember." I walked her through it step by step, the same steps I had walked her through a dozen times before. Find the matches, open the stove door, place the kindling inside, strike the match, hold it to the paper until it catches. There, she said finally. It is burning now. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Good. That is good, Mama. Now close the stove door and sit in your chair. I will call you again in a few hours. Will you come visit soon? She asked. Tomorrow, I promised. I will come tomorrow after my shift. That is good, she said. Your father will be happy to see you. I did not correct her. I simply said goodbye and hung up the phone, and I stood in the break room for a long moment, staring at the wall, feeling the familiar mix of love and grief and helplessness that had become the background noise of my life. Bridget found me there a few minutes later. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "She forgot to light the stove," I said, "and she thinks my father is still alive." Bridget put a hand on my shoulder. "You cannot be there all the time." "I know," I said, "but tonight I wish I could be." At 10 minutes past 10, the lights flickered. I was in Herr Kaufmann's room, adjusting his pillow for the 5th time when I saw it, a brief dimming, like a blink, so quick I might have imagined it. The monitors continued their steady beeping. The fluorescent tube overhead buzzed on. Herr Kaufmann did not seem to notice. But I noticed. Something in my chest tightened, a feeling I could not name. "There," I said, stepping back from the bed. "Is that better?" Herr Kaufmann studied the pillow with great seriousness. "Move it 2 centimeters to the left." I moved it 2 centimeters to the left. "Perfect," he declared. And then the lights went out. Not a flicker this time, not a blink. The room plunged into absolute darkness, so sudden and so complete that for a moment I could not orient myself. The monitors went silent. The buzz of the fluorescent lights stopped. The hum of the ventilation system, which I had never consciously heard before, vanished into nothing. And then, half a second later, the emergency lights kicked in. Dim red bulbs in the corners of the room, casting everything in a strange, blood-colored glow. The backup generators groaned to life somewhere beneath us, and the monitors began beeping again, and the ventilators in the intensive care unit down the hall resumed their rhythmic sighing. But the main lights did not come back on. "What happened?" Herr Kaufmann asked, his voice smaller than before. "Just a power outage," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The generators are running, everything is fine." I did not believe my own words, but I said them anyway because that is what nurses do. We say the calming thing, even when we are not calm. We project certainty, even when we are uncertain. We become the steady ground that others can stand on. I stepped into the corridor. Other nurses were emerging from other rooms, their faces pale in the red emergency light. Bridget was already at the nurse's station, speaking quickly into a phone that apparently still worked. "It is not just us," she said as I approached. "The whole city is out, the whole region." I moved to the window at the end of the corridor and looked out. I had never seen anything like it. Moonster at night was usually a constellation of lights, street lamps, shop windows, apartment buildings, the glow of traffic moving along the main roads. But now there was nothing. The city had simply vanished. In its place was a darkness so profound that I could not tell where the buildings ended and the sky began. No street lights, no car headlights. No distant glow from the industrial district, just black, absolute and total, stretching to the horizon. Above the darkness, the stars were emerging. More stars than I had ever seen from this window, as if the sky itself was revealing a secret it had been keeping. "My God," whispered someone behind me. I turned. It was Frau Hartmann, one of the younger nurses, barely 25, who had only been on the job for 6 months. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "I have never seen it like this," she said. "None of us have," I replied. The next hour was controlled chaos. The head nurse, Frau Braun, assembled us in the break room and gave us our instructions. The backup generators would keep the essential systems running, monitors, ventilators, emergency lights, but they had a limited fuel supply. We needed to conserve power wherever possible. All non-essential equipment was to be shut down. Patients were to be kept calm and informed. No one was to leave the building. "We do not know how widespread this is or how long it will last," Frau Braun said. "Until we have more information, we stay here and we do our jobs." I listened to her words, but my mind was 40 kilometers away, in a farmhouse on the edge of a village, where an old woman sat alone in the dark, perhaps remembering to feed the fire, perhaps forgetting. After the meeting, I retrieved my bag from my locker and found a quiet corner of the break room. I pulled out my father's flashlight, heavy and cold in my hands, and I wound the crank. The familiar click, click, click filled the silence, and then a small beam of light emerged, cutting through the red-tinged darkness. I switched it to radio mode and held it to my ear. Static at first, then faintly a voice, the calm, measured tones of a news announcer. A cascading failure across the European grid. The outage began at approximately 22:10 when a high-voltage line crossing the Ems River was shut down to allow a cruise ship to pass. The resulting power redistribution triggered automatic shutdowns across multiple national grids. Authorities estimate that up to 15 million people are currently without power across Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and Austria. 15 million people. I lowered the radio, my mind struggling to grasp the number. This was not a local outage. This was not something that would be fixed in an hour. This was unprecedented. Temperatures are expected to drop to -3 degrees Celsius tonight, with freezing rain in many areas. Authorities urge citizens to remain indoors and conserve heat. Remain indoors, conserve heat. My mother was alone. She had no phone that would work without electricity. She had no neighbors close enough to check on her. She had a fire that she might or might not remember to feed. And she had a mind that was slowly slipping away, taking with it her ability to care for herself. I wound the radio again and listened for more information, but the announcer was repeating the same details. Cascading failure. 15 million people remain indoors. I turned off the radio and sat in the darkness, holding my father's flashlight, and I felt the choice forming before me. For the next hour, I tried to do my job. I checked on my patients, adjusted blankets, offered reassurances. The hospital was functioning, more or less. The generators held. The essential machines kept running. The staff moved through the corridors with flashlights and calm voices, and from the outside, it might have looked like everything was under control. But inside, I was fracturing. Every time I passed a window, I saw the darkness outside and imagined my mother in it. Every time I heard the wind pick up, rattling the old window frames, I imagined the farmhouse, its stone walls holding in whatever warmth remained, its single occupant drifting between the present and the past. What if she forgot to feed the fire? What if she went outside, looking for my father, and got lost in the cold? What if she simply sat down and stopped moving, the way the very old sometimes do, and let the cold take her? I could not stop the thoughts. They circled and circled, tightening like a rope around my chest. At midnight, I found myself in the break room again, staring at the phone on the wall. It was an old landline, the kind that did not need external power to work, and on an impulse, I picked it up and dialed my mother's number. It rang and rang and rings. No answer. I tried again, same result. Either she was not near the phone, or she could not remember how to answer it, or I forced myself not to think about the other possibilities. I hung up and leaned against the wall, pressing my palms against my eyes. Ingrid. Bridget's voice, gentle and concerned. I lowered my hands. She was standing in the doorway, a flashlight in one hand, her face half illuminated in the dim red light. "What is wrong?" she asked. "My mother," I said, and the words came tumbling out. The phone that was not answered, the fire that might have gone out, the 40 kilometers of dark and icy roads between us. Bridget listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I want to go to her," I said, "but I cannot leave. The patients." "The patients are stable," Bridget said. "We are fully staffed. Frau Braun has everything under control." "But I am supposed to be here. I have a duty." "You have a duty to your mother, too." I stared at her. Frau Braun said no one leaves. Bridget took a step closer. "Frau Braun has not seen you packing the corridors like a caged animal for the last hour. She does not know that your mother is alone in a farmhouse 40 kilometers away with a mind that is leaving her. And I cannot just walk out." "I will cover for you," Bridget said. "I will tell Frau Braun that you were not feeling well, that you went to lie down. By the time she realizes you are gone, you will be halfway there." I shook my head. "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering." Bridget reached out and took my hand. Her grip was firm, warm, steady. "Go, find her. Make sure she is safe. That is what you need to do, and we both know it." "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Bridget smiled, a small, sad smile. "Because I had a mother once too, and when she needed me, I was not there. I was here, doing my duty, being responsible, and she died alone in a hospital bed while I was checking on strangers." Her voice did not waver, but I saw the old grief in her eyes, still sharp after all these years. "Do not make my mistake," she said. "Go to her." As I felt the tears rising, hot and sudden, and I blinked them back. "I do not know how to thank you." "Come back safely," she said. "That is how you thank me." I gathered my things quickly, My coat, my scarf, the bag with my father's flashlight and radio, the thermos of coffee I had brought from home and not yet touched. At the last moment, I grabbed a packet of biscuits from the break room and stuffed them in my pocket. Bridget walked me to the staff entrance at the back of the building. The door opened onto a small parking area, beyond which lay the street, the city, the darkness. "The roads will be impassable," she said. "Cars will be stalled everywhere and there will be no traffic lights. You may have to walk." "I know," I said. "It is 40 kilometers." "I know." She studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded, as if she had found whatever she was looking for. "Your father would have done the same," she said. "He spent his life keeping the lights on for others. Now you are keeping the light on for the one who matters most." I thought of him then, his weathered hands, his patient smile, the way he used to come home after storms and tell me about the lines he had repaired, the homes he had brought back to light. He had believed in that work with his whole heart. He had believed that keeping the lights on was a form of love. And now I was walking into the darkness, carrying the light he had given me, trying to find my way to someone who needed me. "Oh, thank you, Bridget," I said. "Go," she said, "and may God go with you." I stepped through the door, and the cold hit me like a wall. I had never seen Münster like this. The city I had known all my life had become a stranger. The parking lot was a maze of shadows, the cars' dark shapes huddled together like sleeping animals. Beyond it, the street stretched into nothingness. No streetlights, no shop windows, no distant glow of traffic. The freezing rain had stopped, but its effects were everywhere. The ground was coated in a thin layer of ice that glittered faintly in the beam of my flashlight. The trees along the sidewalk were encased in frozen shells, their branches hanging heavy and still. Every surface was treacherous, waiting to betray a careless step. I wound my flashlight 3 turns and the beam steadied. It was not much, a small circle of light in an ocean of dark, but it was enough to see the next step. And that, I told myself, was all I needed, just the next step. Then the next, then the next. As I began to walk, the wind had died down, and in its absence, the silence was overwhelming. No traffic, no sirens, no music from apartment windows, just the crunch of my boots on the icy ground and the distant, occasional bark of a dog. After 10 minutes, I reached my car. It was parked on a side street near the hospital, where I always left it. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob and nothing happened. I tried the key in the door, that worked at least, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine turned over, coughed, caught, a small miracle. But when I pulled out onto the main road, I understood immediately what Bridget had meant. The streets were chaos. Cars had stopped in the middle of intersections when the traffic lights failed. Others had slid off the icy roads and sat at angles on the sidewalks. A few brave drivers were still trying to navigate, their headlights cutting erratic paths through the darkness, but the roads were so clogged that no one was moving. I drove 3 blocks before I reached a complete standstill. Ahead of me, a delivery truck had jackknifed across both lanes. Behind me, other cars were already piling up. I sat in my car for 10 minutes waiting for something to change. Nothing did. I turned off the engine, gathered my bag, and stepped back out into the cold. If I could not drive, I would walk. 40 kilometers was a long way, but I had all night, and my mother was at the end of the road, waiting for someone who might never come if I did not go now. So I locked the car, though what good that would do, I did not know, and I began to walk again. I did not know then that the journey ahead would take me through the longest night of my life. I did not know the people I would meet, the kindness I would receive, the moments of beauty and terror that waited in the darkness. I only knew that I had to walk toward my mother, one step at a time, through a world that had gone suddenly, terribly quiet. And somewhere in my pocket, my father's flashlight pressed against my hip, heavy with his memory, ready to light the way. The city fell away behind me step by step, its familiar shapes dissolving into the fog and darkness. Ahead lay 40 kilometers of frozen roads, silent villages, and a mother who might not remember my name when I arrived. But I kept walking, because that is what you do when someone needs you. You put one foot in front of the other, and you trust that the path will reveal itself. Let me tell you about the first people I met on that journey. A group of strangers who reminded me that even in the darkest night, there is warmth to be found. The parking garage was a cave. I had parked there hundreds of times over the years, always in the same corner spot on the second level, always beneath the same flickering fluorescent tube that maintenance never seemed to fix. I knew that garage the way I knew my own kitchen. Every crack in the concrete, every oil stain, every echo of my footsteps as I walked to and from my car. But now, without the fluorescent lights, without the hum of the ventilation fans, without the green glow of the exit signs, it had become a place I did not recognize. My flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating only what was directly in front of me. Everything else was shadow and silence. My footsteps echoed strangely, too loud, too hollow, as if the garage itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I found my car where I had left it, nestled between a doctor's BMW and a janitor's ancient Volkswagen. The ice had already begun to form on the windshield, a thin crystalline shell that caught my flashlight beam and scattered it into tiny rainbows. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob. Nothing. The electronic lock was dead, victim of the same power failure that had claimed everything else. But the physical key still worked, a small mercy, and I slid into the driver's seat, pulling the door closed behind me. The interior was cold. Not as cold as outside, but cold enough that I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight. I set the light on the passenger seat, angled toward the dashboard, and inserted the key into the ignition. Please, I thought, please start. The engine turned over once, twice. On the third try, it caught, coughing to life with a sound that seemed almost surprised. The dashboard lights flickered on, dim and uncertain, but on, and the heater began to blow cold air that would eventually, hopefully, become warm. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. For a moment, I simply sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. The car was running. The heater was working. I had 40 kilometers to go, but I had a vehicle to carry me there. Perhaps this would not be so difficult after all. I pulled out of the parking space carefully, mindful of the ice, and navigated toward the exit ramp. The garage was designed to spiral downward, each level connected by a steep curve of concrete, and without the usual lights to guide me, I had to rely entirely on my headlights and my memory. The ramp seemed longer than I remembered. The curves seemed sharper. By the time I emerged onto the street, my hands were aching from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. And then I saw what waited for me outside. The streets of Münster had become a frozen labyrinth. Cars were everywhere, stopped in the middle of intersections, angled across sidewalks, clustered in confused groups where traffic lights had failed and drivers had lost their way. Some had their headlights on, their batteries still holding, casting strange shadows across the ice-covered road. Others were dark and abandoned, their doors hanging open, their owners gone to find help or shelter. I drove slowly, carefully, weaving between the obstacles. The ice made every turn treacherous. Twice, I felt my tires lose their grip, the car sliding sideways before I regained control. The freezing rain had stopped, but its damage was done. The roads were skating rinks, and I was trying to navigate them in a vehicle that had never been designed for such conditions. I made it 3 blocks before I reached the first major intersection. The scene there was chaos. A delivery truck had jackknifed across both lanes, its trailer twisted at an unnatural angle, blocking the road completely. Behind it, cars had piled up in a confused mass, some still running, others abandoned. A few people stood on the sidewalk, talking in low voices, their breath fogging in the cold. No one seemed to know what to do. I pulled my car to the side of the road and turned off the engine. There was no point in wasting fuel. The road ahead was impassable, and there was no telling how long it would remain so. For a long moment, I sat in the darkness, listening to the tick of the cooling engine and the distant murmur of voices outside. My headlights were off now, and without them, the world had shrunk to the small circle illuminated by my flashlight on the passenger seat. 40 kilometers, I thought. 40 kilometers, and I cannot even get past the first intersection. I could wait, the power might come back on. The roads might be cleared. Someone might come along with a solution. But my mother was alone in the darkness. And every hour that passed was another hour she spent without heat, without help, without anyone to remind her that she was not alone. And I could not wait. I gathered my bag, wound my flashlight 3 times, and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me like a physical force. It was not just cold. It was sharp, biting, the kind of cold that finds every gap in your clothing and slips inside like water. The freezing rain had left a layer of ice on everything, and the ground crackled under my boots with each step. I locked my car and began to walk toward the intersection, picking my way carefully over the icy pavement. Other people were doing the same, dark shapes moving through the darkness, their flashlights bobbing like fireflies. We passed each other without speaking, each lost in our own urgency. At the intersection, I saw him. He was standing beside a small gray Opel, one hand on the roof, the other pressed against his chest. He was old, 70 at least, maybe older. with a thin coat that was not nearly warm enough for this weather and a face that was pale even in the dim light of my flashlight. He was shivering, not the normal shiver of cold, but the deep, uncontrollable tremor that comes when the body is losing its battle against hypothermia. And I stopped. "And sir," I called out, "are you all right?" He looked up at me, and I saw the confusion in his eyes. The same confusion I had seen so many times in my patients at the hospital. The bewilderment of someone who finds themselves in a situation they cannot understand. "My car," he said, his voice thin and reedy. "It stopped. I do not know why it stopped." I moved closer, keeping my flashlight beam low so it would not blind him. "The power is out," I said gently. "Many cars have stopped. It is not your fault." He shook his head slowly, as if he had not heard me. "I was trying to get to my wife. She is in the nursing home on the other side of the city. She will be frightened. She does not like the dark." Something in my chest tightened. Here was another person, just like me, trying to reach someone they loved. Another person caught in the same impossible situation. "What is your name?" I asked. "Klaus," he said, "Klaus Weber." "I am Ingrid," I said. "I am a nurse. May I check on you, Herr Weber? You look very cold." He nodded vaguely, and I stepped closer, taking his hand in mine. His fingers were like ice, even through my gloves. His pulse, when I found it at his wrist, was slow and irregular. He needed warmth. He needed shelter. He needed to get out of this cold before it killed him. But I also needed to get to my mother, and I could not carry him 40 kilometers through the darkness. "Herr Weber," I said, "how long have you been standing here?" "I do not know," he admitted. "The car stopped and I did not know what to do." I looked around, searching for options. The people on the sidewalk had dispersed, and I could not see any open buildings nearby. But in the distance, perhaps 2 blocks away, I could see the faint flicker of candlelight in a ground floor window. "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, the way I did with frightened patients. "Do you see that light over there? The one in the window?" He squinted into the darkness. Yes, I see it." "I want you to walk toward that light. There are people there who can help you get warm. Can you do that?" "But my wife." "Your wife would want you to be safe," I said. "She would want you to get warm first, and when the power comes back on, you can go to her. But right now, you need to get out of the cold." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the struggle in his eyes, the desperate need to reach his wife, warring against the exhaustion and confusion that the cold had brought. I understood that struggle. I was living it myself. "Will you walk with me?" he asked, his voice small. I hesitated. Every minute I spent here was a minute I was not walking toward my mother. But I could not leave him here, shivering beside his dead car, waiting for a rescue that might not come. "I will walk you to the light," I said, "and then I must continue on my way. I have someone waiting for me too." He nodded, accepting this. "Thank you, Ingrid, thank you." I took his arm, steadying him, and together we began to walk toward the flickering window in the distance. The walk took longer than it should have. Herr Weber's legs were unsteady, and the ice made every step treacherous. But we moved slowly, carefully, one foot in front of the other, and gradually the candlelight grew closer. As we walked, he told me about his wife. Her name was Else. They had been married for 52 years. She had been in the nursing home for 3 months now, ever since the stroke that had taken her speech and half her movement. He visited her every day without fail, bringing her favorite chocolates and reading to her from the books she had loved when they were young. "She knows I am coming," he said. "Every day at 4 o'clock she watches the door, and when I walk in she smiles. It is the only time she smiles." I thought of my mother, waiting in the farmhouse, perhaps watching the door for someone who would never come if I did not keep walking. "She sounds wonderful," I said. "Oh, she is," he said simply. "She is everything." We reached the building with the candle-lit window, an apartment complex, 3 stories tall, with a small courtyard in front. The ground floor window was glowing with warm light, and I could see shadows moving inside. I helped Herr Weber up the steps to the entrance and knocked on the door. A young woman answered, maybe 25, with worried eyes and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Behind her, I could see a small apartment crowded with people, neighbors, it seemed, who had gathered together for warmth and company. "Please," I said, "this man needs help. He has been outside too long. He needs warmth." The woman did not hesitate. She reached out and took Herr Weber's arm, guiding him inside. "Of course," she said. Come in, we have tea, we have blankets." Herr Weber turned back to me, his eyes glistening in the candlelight. "Thank you, Ingrid. I hope you find who you are looking for." "I hope you reach your wife," I said. "Give her my best when you see her." He nodded, and then the door closed, and he was gone. I stood alone on the doorstep for a moment, the cold pressing in around me. I had helped him. I had done what I could. But the delay had cost me precious time, and I still had so far to go. I wound my flashlight, checked my direction, and began to walk again. I left my car on the shoulder of the road, locked and waiting for a return that might come tomorrow or might come never. The streets behind me were clogged with abandoned vehicles, the debris of a city that had stopped functioning in a single moment. Ahead, the road stretched into darkness, and I could see nothing but the small circle of light from my father's flashlight. I walked for perhaps 20 minutes after that, navigating by instinct and memory through streets that I had driven 100 times but had never walked. The city was different on foot, smaller in some ways, larger in others. The buildings loomed overhead, their windows dark and empty, their familiar facades transformed into the walls of a maze. And then, ahead of me, I saw another light. Not candlelight this time, something brighter, warmer, more alive. I walked toward it and found myself at the edge of the university district. I saw the glow from a block away, warm, flickering, alive. It came from a ground floor apartment in one of the old buildings that lined the street near the university. The windows were filled with candlelight, dozens of candles arranged on sills and tables, their flames dancing behind the glass like something from a fairy tale. My heart lifted. Where there was light, there were people, and where there were people, there might be warmth, information, help. I approached the building carefully, picking my way over the icy sidewalk. The street here was quieter than near the hospital, fewer cars, fewer people. But I could hear voices drifting from the apartment, low and murmuring, occasionally punctuated by laughter. The door to the building was unlocked. I stepped inside into a small foyer that smelled of old wood and wet wool. A staircase led upward into darkness, but straight ahead, a door stood ajar, and warm light spilled through the gap. I knocked. The voices inside fell silent. Footsteps approached, and then the door swung open, revealing a young woman perhaps 22 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a thick sweater that hung past her hips. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying a faint accent, Spanish, I thought. "I am sorry to disturb you," I said. "I am trying to get to my mother in a village about 40 kilometers from here. I saw your lights and thought." I hesitated, unsure what I had thought. "I thought perhaps you might have information about the outage, about the roads." The young woman's expression shifted from wariness to concern. 40 kilometers, in this cold, on foot. "I have no choice. My mother is alone. She has dementia. There is no one else to check on her." For a moment, the young woman studied me, her dark eyes searching my face. Then she stepped back from the door and gestured inside. "Come in," she said. "Get warm. We can share what we know." The apartment was small but crowded. At least a dozen young people were gathered inside, sitting on couches, chairs, and cushions on the floor. Candles covered every available surface on the coffee table, the windowsills, the kitchen counter, casting everything in a warm, flickering glow. The air smelled of candle wax and something savory, soup perhaps, simmering on a camp stove in the corner. "I am Sophia," the young woman said as she led me inside. "These are my friends, my housemates, some neighbors from upstairs." She gestured vaguely at the assembled group, who watched me with curious, friendly eyes. We decided to gather together when the power went out, safer that way, warmer. "And that was wise," I said. Sophia guided me to a chair near the camp stove, where the warmth radiated outward like a blessing. I sank into the seat gratefully, feeling the cold begin to loosen its grip on my bones. "You are frozen through," Sophia said, frowning. "How long have you been walking?" "Perhaps an hour," I said. "Maybe a little more. I lost track." She shook her head. "Wait here." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a thermos and a pair of thick wool gloves. "The thermos has tea," she said, pressing it into my hands. "The gloves belong to my grandfather. They are too big for me, but they are very warm." "I cannot take these," I protested. "You may need them." "We are staying here where it is warm," Sophia said firmly. "You are walking 40 kilometers in the dark. You need them more than we do." I looked down at the thermos in my hands, at the gloves resting on my lap, and I felt a sudden pressure behind my eyes, the threat of tears that I could not afford to shed. "Thank you," I whispered. "It is nothing," Sophia said, though we both knew it was not nothing. In a crisis, every small kindness is a lifeline. While I warmed myself by the camp stove, the other students shared what they knew about the outage. One of them, a young man named Thomas who was studying engineering, had been listening to a battery-powered radio and had pieced together the story. "It started with a ship," he said. A cruise ship being moved down the Ems River. The power company shut down a high-voltage line to let the ship pass underneath. Standard procedure, apparently. But the power redistribution caused a cascade failure across the grid. One by one, the systems overloaded and shut down. Within minutes, the entire Western European grid was affected. 15 million people, added another student, a girl with red hair and glasses. That is what the radio said. 15 million people without power. I thought of all those people in the darkness. 15 million stories, each one different, each one shaped by who they were trying to reach, what they were trying to protect. Do they know when it will be restored? I asked. Thomas shook his head. They are working on it. Crews are out across the entire region, but some areas might not have power until morning. Morning, that was at least 8 hours away. My mother had been alone for, I calculated quickly, almost 2 hours now, and she would be alone for at least 8 more if I did not reach her. I stood up, pulling on the gloves Sophia had given me. Thank you for your kindness, I said, but I must go. I cannot wait for morning. Sophia looked up at me, her dark eyes troubled. You cannot walk 40 kilometers in this weather. The roads are icy. The temperature is dropping. It is not safe. My mother is not safe either, I said. She is alone in a farmhouse with no heat. She does not remember how to care for herself. If I do not go to her, no one will. Sophia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She understood. Perhaps she had a mother or grandmother of her own, somewhere far away, someone she would walk through darkness to reach. At least take directions, she said. There is a footpath that runs along the old railway line. It avoids the main roads and the traffic. It will be faster. She drew a quick map on a scrap of paper. The street where we were, the turn I would need to make, the place where the footpath began. I studied it carefully, committing the details to memory. The path is not well lit even in normal times, Sophia warned. But it is straight and it goes in the right direction. If you follow it, you will reach the edge of the city within an hour. And thank you, I said, for everything. She walked me to the door, the other students calling out goodbyes and good lucks behind her. At the threshold, she pressed the thermos more firmly into my hands. Be safe, she said. Your mother is lucky to have you. I wanted to tell her that I did not feel brave, only desperate. I wanted to tell her that I was terrified of what I might find at the end of this journey. But I simply thanked her and stepped back into the cold. The footpath began 2 blocks from Sophia's apartment, marked by a rusted sign that I would never have noticed if I had not been looking for it. It wound through a gap between 2 buildings, descended a short slope, and then straightened out, following the route of the old railway line that had once connected Münster to the surrounding villages. The path was narrow and uneven, its surface covered in a thin layer of ice that crunched under my boots. On either side, bare trees rose up like sentinels, their branches reaching toward a sky that was beginning to clear, the clouds parting to reveal the stars. And I walked. The thermos was warm in my hands. The gloves were indeed too large, but they were wonderfully thick, trapping the heat of my body and holding it close. I could feel the tea sloshing gently as I moved, a reminder that somewhere behind me, a group of strangers had shared their warmth with me for no reason other than kindness. I did not know their names, not all of them. I did not know their stories, but I would remember them for the rest of my life. Sophia with her dark eyes and her grandfather's gloves. Thomas with his engineering knowledge and his radio. The girl with red hair who had counted the millions. I learned that night that kindness does not ask for credentials. It does not require that you know someone or that they know you. It simply sees a need and reaches out to fill it. Those young people, strangers from different countries and different walks of life, had opened their door without hesitation. They had shared their warmth, their information, their hope. And in doing so, they had given me the strength to keep walking. I thought about this as the city thinned around me, the buildings giving way to empty lots and then to fields. The footpath stretched ahead, a gray ribbon in the darkness, and I followed it step by step, trusting that it would lead me where I needed to go. The fog was thickening now, rolling in from the fields in soft white waves. My flashlight beam caught the moisture in the air, turning it into a glowing haze that seemed to surround me on all sides. I could see perhaps 10 meters ahead, no more. Everything beyond that was mystery. But I kept walking. And slowly, gradually, the world around me began to change. There was a moment, I returned to it often in my dreams, when I passed through a small orchard at the edge of the city. The footpath curved slightly to the right, skirting a low stone wall, and suddenly the trees were all around me. Apple trees, I think, though it was hard to tell without their leaves. They stood in neat rows, their bare branches reaching upward like arms raised in prayer. The freezing rain had coated everything in ice. Every branch, every twig, every remaining shriveled fruit that had not been harvested was encased in a crystalline shell. And when I shone my flashlight on them, they sparkled, not just reflected, but truly sparkled, as if each branch had been transformed into a strand of diamonds. And I stopped walking. For a moment, I simply stood there, turning slowly, letting my flashlight play across the frozen branches. The light scattered and refracted, throwing tiny rainbows onto the fog around me. It was like standing inside a chandelier, or inside a jewel, or inside something that had no name in any language I knew. I had never seen anything so beautiful, or so strange. The orchard was utterly silent. The fog muffled every sound, and without the wind there was nothing to hear. No rustling of leaves, no creaking of branches, no distant hum of traffic. The world had stopped speaking. It was simply there, frozen and glittering, waiting. I found myself holding my breath, afraid that any sound I made would shatter the spell. The cold pressed against my face, but I barely felt it. The ache in my legs, the weight of my bag, the worry gnawing at my chest, all of it faded, replaced by a stillness so complete that it felt like a kind of peace. I do not know how long I stood there. Time moved strangely that night, stretching and contracting in ways that made no sense. It might have been a minute, it might have been 10. Eventually, I reached out and touched one of the branches. The ice was smooth and cold beneath my fingers, even through Sophia's gloves. It was like touching a window in winter, that same hard, unyielding surface. But there was something else too, a fragility, a sense that the whole thing could shatter at any moment, that the beauty around me was temporary and precious. As I thought of my father then, he had loved orchards. When I was a child, he would take me to pick apples in the autumn, driving out to the farms beyond the city where the trees grew in long, straight rows. He would lift me up so I could reach the highest branches, and I would drop the apples into the basket below, laughing as they tumbled and rolled. "Look at that little one," he would say, pointing at the leaves turning gold and red. "Even in the dying season, there is beauty." I imagined him standing beside me now, in this frozen orchard, his weathered hand on my shoulder. I imagined him pointing at the ice-covered branches, his voice full of wonder. "Look at that little one. Even in the darkness, there is beauty." I felt tears prick at my eyes, and this time I let them come. They froze on my cheeks almost immediately, tiny crystals of grief and love and memory. I wiped them away with the back of my glove and took a deep, shuddering breath. "And I miss you, Papa," I whispered. The fog swallowed my words, but I felt them settle somewhere deep inside me, a weight that was also a comfort. I wound my father's radio and held it to my ear, needing to hear a human voice, needing to be reminded that the world still existed beyond this frozen fairy tale. Static at first, then faintly the announcer, calm, measured, professional. "Crews are working through the night to restore power. Some areas in North Rhine-Westphalia have already been reconnected. Authorities continue to urge citizens to remain indoors if possible and conserve heat. Temperatures are expected to drop further before dawn, reaching -5 degrees Celsius in some areas." -5, colder than I had thought. I turned off the radio to save the battery and tucked it back into my pocket. The announcer's voice had grounded me, pulled me back from the dreaming stillness of the orchard. I had a purpose. I had a destination. I could not stay here, no matter how beautiful it was. But before I left, I took one last look around. The trees stood in their silent rows, ice-covered and gleaming. The fog curled between them, soft and white, like breath made visible. Above, through a gap in the clouds, I could see stars, more stars than I had ever seen from Münster, a river of light flowing across the sky. The power outage had done that, I realized. By turning off all the lights below, it had revealed the lights above. The city's glow had always hidden the stars, and now, for one night, they were visible again. A reminder that the darkness we create is not the only darkness there is. "Thank you," I said softly, though I did not know who I was thanking. The orchard, the stars, my father's memory, the universe itself. Then I turned off my flashlight to save the battery, pulled my coat tighter around me, and walked on. The orchard gave way to farmland. The footpath ended at a road, and the road stretched ahead into the fog, narrow and unpaved, its surface covered in a thin layer of ice. I was truly leaving the city behind now. The last buildings had faded into the darkness, and ahead of me lay only fields and farms and small villages, each one a cluster of dark shapes huddled against the cold. I walked for perhaps 20 minutes, following the road as it curved gently through the landscape. The fog was thinner here, and I could see the silhouettes of farmhouses in the distance, their windows dark, their chimneys sending thin trails of smoke into the sky. Smoke, that meant fire, that meant warmth. And then I saw it, a farmhouse larger than the others, set back from the road at the end of a long gravel drive. Smoke was rising steadily from its chimney, a dark plume against the gray sky. And in one of its windows, I could see the faint flicker of light. Not candlelight, something steadier, warmer, more substantial. A wood fire. Someone was home and they had heat. I turned down the gravel drive, my boots crunching on the frozen ground, and walked toward the farmhouse. I smelled the smoke before I saw the house clearly. Wood smoke, the kind that means warmth and life. It drifted through the fog like a thread, and I followed it up the gravel drive, past a stone wall covered in dormant ivy, past a barn that loomed dark and silent in the night. The farmhouse emerged from the fog like something out of another century. It was old. I could tell that even in the darkness, with thick stone walls and small windows and a heavy wooden door that looked like it had been hanging on its hinges for 100 years. No modern additions, no satellite dish on the roof, no cars in the driveway. Just the house and the barn and the smoke rising from the chimney. As I knocked on the door, for a long moment, nothing happened. I stood in the cold, listening to the silence, wondering if I had been wrong about the light in the window. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, the creak of old floorboards, and the door swung open. A man stood there, perhaps 75, with a face as weathered as the farmhouse walls. He wore a heavy wool sweater and sturdy boots, and he held an oil lamp in one hand, its flame casting dancing shadows across his features. He looked at me for a long moment, taking in my appearance. The nurse's uniform under my coat, the flashlight in my hand, the fog still clinging to my hair. "You are out late," he said. It was not a question. "I am trying to reach my mother," I said. "She lives in a farmhouse about 30 kilometers from here. She is alone, and I am worried about her." The man studied me a moment longer. Then he stepped back and gestured inside. "Come in," he said. "You will freeze if you stay out there." The warmth hit me like a wave as I stepped through the door. The farmhouse was heated by a massive wood-burning stove, the kind that had been used in German farmhouses for centuries. It dominated one corner of the main room, its cast-iron surface radiating heat in all directions. Near it, an old woman sat in a wooden rocking chair, a blanket over her knees, knitting something that looked like a sock. She looked up as I entered, her needles pausing in their rhythm. "Another traveler?" she asked. "Trying to get to her mother," the man said, closing the door behind me. 30 kilometers still to go." The woman set down her knitting and stood, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned to conserve energy over many decades. "Sit, sit," she said, gesturing to a chair near the stove. "You are frozen through. Ernst, put the kettle on." I tried to protest, but she waved away my objections with a practiced hand. "We have plenty of wood, plenty of water. The power," she gestured vaguely toward the dark light fixture on the ceiling, "it means nothing to us here. We have lived without it before, and we will again." I sank into the chair, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The stove crackled and popped, a sound so comforting that I felt my eyes prickling again. I am Ingrid, I said. I work at the hospital in Münster. I left when the power went out because my mother. I stopped, unsure how to explain. You do not need to explain, the woman said gently. I am Helga. This is my husband Ernst. We have been married for 53 years, and I can tell you, there is nothing that would stop me from going to him if he needed me. Ernst returned from the kitchen with a steaming mug, which he pressed into my hands. It was not tea, I realized as I took a sip, but broth, thick and savory, warming me from the inside out. Potato soup, Helga said, watching me drink. I made it this afternoon, before the power went out. It has been staying warm on the stove ever since. It is wonderful, I said, and I meant it. It was the best thing I had ever tasted, not because of its flavor, but because of what it represented. Warmth, kindness, sanctuary in the midst of the storm. While I drank my soup, Helga and Ernst told me about their life on the farm. They had lived here for their entire marriage, in the house that had belonged to Ernst's parents and grandparents before him. They raised cattle and grew potatoes and kept a small apple orchard. I thought of the frozen orchard I had passed through and wondered if it was theirs. They had never relied on electricity the way city people did. Their stove burned wood they cut themselves. Their lamps burned oil they bought from a supplier in the next village. They had a radio, powered by batteries, and a telephone, but that was the extent of their connection to the modern world. When we heard the power was out, we barely noticed, Ernst said. We lit our lamps, stoked the fire, and went on with our evening. It is the city people who suffer in times like this. They have forgotten how to live without the machines. I thought of my apartment in Münster, with its electric heat and electric lights and electric stove. I thought of my mother's farmhouse, which still had a wood stove, but which she could no longer remember how to use reliably. Your mother, Helga said, as if reading my thoughts. She lives alone. Yes, I said. She has dementia. She forgets things, important things. I called her earlier, and she did not remember to light the fire. I walked her through it on the phone, but I do not know if she will remember to keep feeding it. Helga nodded slowly, her eyes full of understanding. My sister had the same condition at the end. The mind goes, but the person remains. It is the cruelest thing. I should have moved her to a care facility, I said. I should have made her leave the farmhouse. But she has lived there her whole life. How could I take her away from that? You could not, Ernst said firmly. A person belongs where they belong. Your mother chose that farmhouse, and she deserves to die there among the things she loves. His words were blunt but not unkind. I understood what he meant. My mother's farmhouse was not just a building. It was her history, her identity, the container of everything she had been and loved. To take her away from it would be to take away a piece of her soul. I just hope I can get there in time, I said. Ernst stood abruptly and disappeared into the back of the house. When he returned, he was carrying an old bicycle, heavy, rust-spotted, with thick tires and a basket mounted on the front. Take this, he said. It is not much, but it will be faster than walking. And I stared at him. I cannot take your bicycle. You can, he said. It was my son's when he was a boy. He lives in Hamburg now, has not been back in 3 years. The bicycle just sits in the barn, gathering dust. It would be good for it to be useful again. And I will bring it back, I promised. If you can, Ernst said. If not, it does not matter. What matters is that you reach your mother. Helga pressed a cloth bundle into my hands. More bread, I realized, wrapped carefully to keep it fresh. For your mother, she said. Tell her she has a good daughter. I felt my throat tighten, and I could not speak. I simply nodded, clutching the bread and the bicycle and the warmth they had given me. At the door, I turned back. How can I thank you? You do not need to thank us, Helga said. When this is over, when your mother is safe, perhaps you will have a chance to help someone else. That is how you thank us. Ernst opened the door and the cold rushed in, a reminder of what waited outside. But I was stronger now. Warmer, fed, ready. Your father was a lineman, you said? Ernst asked, nodding at the flashlight in my bag. Yes, I said. He spent his whole life keeping the lights on for others. Ernst smiled, a slow, warm smile that transformed his weathered face. Then you come by it honestly, the desire to help, the willingness to walk into the dark. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a brief paternal gesture. Go find her, and may the road rise to meet you. I climbed onto the bicycle, settled my bag in the basket, and pushed off down the gravel drive. Behind me, I heard the farmhouse door close, and the last of the light disappeared. But the warmth stayed with me, a glow in my chest that had nothing to do with the soup or the fire. It was the warmth of kindness, freely given. The warmth of strangers who became, for one night, family. I pedaled into the darkness, the bread in my basket, my father's light in my pocket, and I did not look back. The bicycle changed everything. Where I had been walking, now I was flying, or as close to flying as one can get on a rust-spotted bicycle on icy roads in the middle of the night. The cold air rushed past my face, and the kilometers began to fall away behind me. But the journey was not over. I still had 25 kilometers to go, and the night was growing colder. The fog was thickening, and somewhere ahead I knew there would be more challenges, more choices, more moments that would test everything I had. Let me tell you about what I found next. A family walking through the darkness, a church filled with candlelight, and a crossroads where I almost lost my way. The bicycle was old and heavy, but it moved. That was all I needed. The wheels crunched on the frozen road, and I felt faster than hope, faster than I had dared to imagine when I first stepped out of the hospital into the darkness. The pedals turned beneath my feet in a steady rhythm, and with each revolution, my mother grew a little closer. Ernst's bicycle was built for durability, not speed. Its frame was thick steel, its tires wide and sturdy, its handlebars curved in the old-fashioned way. There were no gears to shift, no handbrakes to squeeze, just the pedals and the road and the simple mechanics of forward motion. I had mounted my father's flashlight on the front basket, angling it to illuminate the road ahead. The beam bounced with each bump and rut, casting wild shadows across the frozen landscape. It was disorienting at first, but I learned to trust it, to let my eyes adjust to the rhythm of the light, to see the obstacles before they reached me. The road stretched ahead in a long, straight line, bordered on both sides by empty fields. The The fog had thinned slightly, and I could see the dark silhouettes of trees in the distance, their branches etched against a sky that was slowly clearing. Stars were appearing now, one by one, like candles being lit in a vast cathedral. And I pedaled. The cold air rushed past my face, finding every gap in my scarf, every exposed inch of skin. My eyes watered, and I had to blink constantly to keep my vision clear. But I did not slow down. Every minute I saved was a minute my mother would spend less alone in the cold. I thought about time as I rode. How strange it was, how elastic. The hours I had spent at the hospital before the outage had passed without notice, unremarkable and forgettable. But the hours since, each one had been an eternity, filled with more experience and emotion than whole weeks of ordinary life. Perhaps that is what crisis does to us. It compresses time, forces us to be fully present in each moment. There is no room for distraction, no space for the small worries that usually fill our days. There is only the next step, the next breath, the next choice. I had made so many choices already tonight: to leave the hospital, to help Herr Weber, to accept Sophia's kindness, to trust Ernst and Helga. Each choice had brought me closer to my mother, but each choice had also changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I was not the same woman who had started her shift at the hospital 12 hours ago. I would never be that woman again. I had been writing for perhaps 20 minutes when I saw them. At first, I thought they were shadows, dark shapes moving slowly along the side of the road. But as I drew closer, my flashlight revealed them for what they were: a family walking through the darkness. There were 4 of them: a man and a woman, both in their 30s, bundled in coats and scarves, and 2 children, a boy perhaps 7 years old and a girl no more than 4, riding on her father's back with her arms wrapped around his neck. They stopped when they saw my light approaching, shielding their eyes against the glare. I slowed the bicycle and came to a halt beside them. "Are you all right?" I asked. The man lowered his hand, blinking in the light. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his breath coming in quick, visible puffs. "We are trying to reach my wife's parents," he said. "They live in Horstmer. They have a fireplace." I knew Horstmer. It was a small town about 15 kilometers from here, in the opposite direction from where I was going, but along a road that intersected with this one. "The power went out in our apartment," the woman added. She was holding the boy's hand tightly, her other arm wrapped around herself for warmth. "The heating stopped. The children were too cold. We had to leave." I looked at the children. The boy was shivering despite his thick coat, his face pale in the flashlight beam. The girl on her father's back had her eyes closed, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. She might have been sleeping, or she might have simply run out of energy to stay awake. "How far have you walked?" I asked. "About 8 kilometers, the man said. "We have 7 more to go." 7 kilometers. In this cold, with 2 small children on icy roads. It would take them at least 2 more hours, probably more. I thought of the Brenner's farmhouse, perhaps 3 kilometers behind me now. Warmth, soup, a wood stove that did not need electricity. "Listen to me," I said. "About 3 kilometers back, there is a farmhouse on the right side of the road. An older couple lives there, Ernst and Helga Brenner. They have a wood stove and plenty of heat. Tell them Ingrid sent you. They will take you in." The man's eyes widened. "You are sure they would not mind?" "I am sure," I said. "They helped me when I needed it. They will help you too." The woman let out a small sound, not quite a sob, but close. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude, or simply the release of tension that had been building for hours. Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much." I reached into my bag and pulled out my father's radio. "Here," I said, holding it out to them. "This will tell you what is happening with the power. Just wind the crank and it will work." The man took the radio carefully, as if it were something precious. "We cannot take this. You might need it." "I am almost to my mother," I said. It was not quite true. I still had at least 20 kilometers to go, but I did not want them to worry about me. "I will not need it anymore." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ingrid. I hope you find your mother safe." "And I hope you find warmth," I said. I watched them turn back the way they had come, the man adjusting his daughter on his back, the woman taking the boy's hand again. They moved slowly, but they moved with purpose now, knowing that shelter was waiting for them. I climbed back onto the bicycle and continued on my way. The road curved gently as I rode, winding through farmland that was slowly giving way to forest. The trees grew closer together here, their bare branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the stars. The darkness was deeper, the fog thicker, and I had to slow down to navigate the icy patches that appeared without warning. I missed the radio. It had been a comfort, knowing that I could hear a human voice whenever I needed one, that I was still connected to the larger world. Without it, I felt more alone than ever, just me and the bicycle and the darkness, moving through a landscape that seemed to have no end. But I had given it to a family who needed it more, and that felt right. I thought about the Brenners as I rode, about Ernst's weathered hands and Helga's gentle eyes, about the soup and the bread and the bicycle that had belonged to their son. They had given me so much, and I would probably never see them again. How do you thank someone for a gift like that? How do you repay kindness that expects nothing in return? Perhaps, I thought, you do not repay it to them. Perhaps you pass it on to someone else, and they pass it on to another, and the kindness ripples outward in widening circles until it touches people you will never meet. That is what Helga had said. When your mother is safe, perhaps you will have a chance to help someone else. That is how you thank us. I pedaled harder, feeling the burn in my legs, the ache in my shoulders. The cold was seeping through my coat now, finding its way past the layers of wool and cotton to the skin beneath. But I did not stop. I could not stop. My mother was waiting. I do not know exactly when the tire went flat. One moment I was riding smoothly, the wheels turning in their steady rhythm. The next, I felt the bicycle lurch beneath me, the front wheel suddenly heavy and unresponsive. I squeezed the handbrakes, the old-fashioned kind that pushed against the wheel rim, and came to an unsteady halt. I climbed off and knelt beside the front wheel, shining my flashlight on the tire. The damage was obvious. A long gash in the rubber, probably caused by a shard of ice or a sharp stone hidden on the road. The tire was completely deflated, and there was no way to repair it without tools and materials I did not have. I stood up slowly, looking at the road ahead. The forest stretched on as far as I could see, dark and silent and seemingly endless. I had perhaps 15 kilometers left to go. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I had lost track of the exact distance in the darkness and the fog. 15 kilometers on foot in the cold. I could do it. I had walked farther than that before, in better conditions. But the temperature was still dropping, and my legs were already tired from the cycling, and I had no idea how much longer the night would last. I thought about leaving the bicycle here by the side of the road. But something stopped me, the thought of Ernst, who had given it to me so willingly, who had trusted me with something that had belonged to his son. Instead, I pushed the bicycle to the edge of the road and leaned it carefully against a tree, out of sight of anyone who might pass by. If I could, I would come back for it later. If not, well, at least it would be here, waiting. I gathered my bag, checked my flashlight, and began to walk. I walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. The forest gave way to farmland again, and the farmland gave way to the outskirts of a village. I could see the shapes of houses emerging from the fog, small, sturdy buildings huddled together as if for warmth. Most of them were dark, their windows empty, their chimneys cold. But one building was different. The church stood at the center of the village, its steeple rising above the surrounding houses like a beacon. And through its tall, stained glass windows, I could see light, not the cold blue light of electricity, but the warm, flickering glow of dozens of candles. I walked toward it, my footsteps crunching on the frozen ground, my breath fogging in the cold air. The church door was heavy and old, but it swung open easily when I pushed it. The warmth that greeted me was like stepping into an embrace. The church was full of people. They sat in the pews, wrapped in blankets and coats. They stood in small groups near the altar, talking in low voices. They sat on cushions on the floor, children sleeping with their heads in their parents' laps. There must have been 50 people in the church, maybe more, a whole village gathered together in the one place that still had warmth and light. The candles were everywhere. On the altar, on the windowsills, on stands placed throughout the nave. They cast dancing shadows on the stone walls and wooden beams, turning the church into something out of a medieval painting. At the front of the church, near the altar, an elderly priest was moving among the people, offering words of comfort and cups of something steaming from a large pot. He looked up as I entered, and his face creased into a gentle smile. "It's another traveler," he said, making his way toward me. Come in, you are welcome here." "Thank you, Father," I said. "I am just passing through. I am trying to reach my mother. She lives about 10 kilometers from here." The priest nodded, his eyes taking in my exhausted face, my frozen coat, my trembling hands. "You have come far tonight." "Yes," I said, "very far." He guided me to a pew near the wood stove that someone had set up in the corner of the church. An improvised solution, probably brought from someone's home when the heating failed. A woman handed me a cup of soup, thick and hot, and I wrapped my hands around it gratefully. "I am Father Richter. the priest said, sitting down beside me. This is my parish. When the power went out, we opened the church doors. People began arriving within the hour. Now, he gestured at the crowded nave, we have everyone who could not keep warm at home. The elderly from the care facility down the road, families with young children, people who were caught traveling when the roads became impassable. I looked around at the gathered faces. In the candlelight, they seemed almost peaceful, not frightened, not panicked, but calm. There was even laughter in some corners, the sound of children playing games to pass the time. How did you organize all this? I asked. Father Richter smiled. I did very little. People organized themselves in times of need. Someone brought blankets, someone brought food, someone else brought the stove, and someone else brought the wood to feed it. Everyone gave what they had. I thought of Sophia and her friends sharing their candles and their information, of Ernst and Helga sharing their soup and their bicycle, of the family on the road now hopefully warming themselves by the Brenner's fire. I have seen that tonight, I said. The kindness, everywhere I have gone, people have helped each other. Father Richter nodded. It is always there, the kindness, but we do not always see it. In normal times, we are too busy, too distracted. We pass each other on the street without looking up. We forget that we need each other. He paused, his eyes moving to the candles on the altar. Perhaps that is the gift of nights like this. They remind us of what matters. They show us who we really are. I stayed in the church for perhaps half an hour, long enough to warm myself and drink the soup and rest my aching legs. The woman who had given me the cup introduced herself as Frau Müller. She was the church's housekeeper, she explained, and she had been here when the power went out, preparing for tomorrow's service. I knew people would come, she said. They always do in times of trouble, so I started lighting the candles and I called Father Richter and we opened the doors. The rest, she shrugged, the rest just happened. I told her about my journey, about the hospital and Herr Weber, about Sophia and the students, about Ernst and Helga, and the family on the road. She listened with wide eyes, shaking her head in amazement. 40 kilometers, she said, on foot in this cold for your mother. She would do the same for me, I said. She did do the same when I was young. When I was sick, when I was frightened, she was always there. Now it is my turn. Frau Müller reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. She is blessed to have you. I hope you find her safe. And I hoped so too. Before I left, Father Richter gave me directions to my mother's village. The main road is faster, but it may still be blocked, he said. There is a smaller path that goes through the fields. It is harder to see in the dark, but it is more direct. Look for the crossroads about 2 kilometers from here. Take the left path toward the old mill. It will lead you where you need to go. He made the sign of the cross over me, his voice soft and solemn. Go with God, my child, and remember, you are never truly alone in the dark. And thank you, Father, I said, for everything. I stepped out of the church, back into the cold. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices, the crackle of the stove, the quiet laughter of children. The warmth stayed with me for a long time, even as the darkness closed in again. I walked toward the crossroads, Father Richter's words echoing in my mind. You are never truly alone in the dark. I wanted to believe that, I needed to believe that. Because the darkness ahead was deeper than any I had faced, and I was more tired than I had ever been, and I still had so far to go. There was a crossroads, I dream of it still, where the fog was so thick that I could not see the signposts. Father Richter had said to look for it about 2 kilometers from the church. Take the left path toward the old mill. But as I walked through the darkness, counting my steps, trying to estimate the distance, I found myself doubting everything. Had I gone 2 kilometers, or was it 3? The fog made distances impossible to judge. Every step felt the same as the last, leading nowhere, accomplishing nothing. And then the road forked. I stopped, staring at the place where the single path became 2. In daylight, this would have been simple. I would have seen the signposts, recognized the landmarks, known immediately which way to go. But now there was only fog, pressing in from all sides, swallowing my flashlight beam within arm's reach. I walked to where the signposts should have been. They were there. I could feel them, wooden posts driven into the frozen ground, but the fog was so thick that I could not read the words painted on them. I held my flashlight inches from the wood, squinting, trying to make out the letters. One sign pointed right, a name I did not recognize, blurred and faded. One sign pointed left, another name equally unclear. Neither of them was my mother's village. I felt the first stirring of real fear. Not the manageable worry I had carried all night, the steady undercurrent of concern that had propelled me forward. This was something sharper, colder, the realization that I might be lost, that I might have made a wrong turn somewhere, that I might never find my way to my mother. I had come so far. I had walked and cycled and walked again for hours. I had given away my radio, spent my strength, pushed myself to the edge of exhaustion. And now I was standing at a crossroads in the fog, unable to see which way to go. What if I chose wrong? What if the path I took led me farther from my mother instead of closer? What if I wandered through the darkness until dawn, too late to help her, too late to matter? I felt tears rising, hot and unwelcome. I blinked them back, but they came anyway, freezing on my cheeks in tiny crystals. I do not know what to do, I whispered. The fog swallowed my words. Nothing answered. I do not know how long I stood there. Probably only a few minutes, though it felt like much longer. The cold pressed against me, the fog wrapped around me, and I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. And then I heard it. A cowbell, faint and distant, somewhere to my left. I turned toward the sound, straining to hear it again. For a moment there was nothing, just the silence of the fog, the stillness of the frozen night. Then it came again, a soft clang that seemed to drift through the air like a ghost. A cowbell meant a farm meant people, and people meant help. I remembered my father's voice from a night long ago when I was very young and we had gotten lost on a country road. When you cannot see the way, listen. The land will tell you which way to go. He had taught me to navigate by sound, by smell, by the feeling of the ground beneath my feet. The skills of someone who had spent his life working outdoors, in all weather, in all conditions. I had forgotten those lessons over the years, living in the city, relying on streetlights and GPS and all the tools of modern life. But now, standing at the crossroads in the fog, they came back to me. And I closed my eyes. I listened. The cowbell again, still to my left. And beneath it, something else, the faint sound of water, a stream perhaps, running somewhere in the darkness. And beneath that, the smell of wood smoke, drifting on the barely perceptible breeze. Left, everything was telling me to go left. I opened my eyes, wiped the frozen tears from my cheeks, and took the left path. The fog began to thin almost immediately. It was as if the crossroads had been a test, and I had passed it. The gray wall that had surrounded me began to lift, revealing glimpses of the landscape beyond, fields and fences, trees and hedgerows, the dark shapes of buildings in the distance. The land rose slightly as I walked, and I recognized the shape of the hills. These were the hills I had seen from my mother's farmhouse, the hills I had climbed as a child, the hills that meant I was close to home. I was close now, so close I could almost feel her presence, waiting for me in that old farmhouse at the end of the lane. The cowbell sounded again, closer this time, and I saw the farm it belonged to, a small holding with a barn and a paddock, where a single cow stood in the darkness, her breath steaming in the cold air. She looked at me as I passed, her eyes gleaming in my flashlight beam, and I felt a strange kinship with her. Both of us out here in the cold, both of us waiting for the night to end. "Thank you," I said softly. She did not answer, but I meant it anyway. I walked on, the hills growing clearer with each step, the fog falling away behind me like a curtain being drawn back. And somewhere ahead, I knew, my mother was waiting. Even in the fog, even in the dark, I knew this road. My feet knew it, my heart knew it. Every curve, every dip, every stone that jutted up from the frozen ground, all of it was written in my bones, a map that no power outage could erase. This was the road I had walked 1,000 times as a child, going to and from my grandmother's house. The road where I had learned to ride a bicycle, where I had run races with my cousins, where I had walked hand in hand with my father on summer evenings while he told me stories about the stars. Now I was walking it again, in the deepest darkness I had ever known, and every step was both strange and familiar. The lane was narrow, barely wide enough for a single car, bordered on both sides by old stone walls that had been built by hands long since turned to dust. Ice crusted the stones, and the frost on the ground crunched under my boots, the only sound in the vast silence of the night. To my right, I could see the shape of the old Schuler barn, abandoned now for 20 years, its roof half collapsed, its walls slowly returning to the earth. To my left, the hedgerow where I used to pick blackberries in August, now bare and frost-covered, its thorns glinting in my flashlight beam like tiny teeth. And I was tired. So tired that each step was an effort, a conscious decision to lift one foot and place it in front of the other. My legs ached, my back ached, my shoulders ached from carrying my bag for so many hours. The cold had settled into my bones, a dull numbness that made it hard to feel my fingers and toes. But I kept walking. Because I was close now, so close that I could smell it, the particular smell of my mother's land, the fields she had tended, the garden she had planted, the air that had surrounded me every summer of my childhood. I thought, as I walked, of everyone who had helped me reach this place. Bridget, who had covered for me at the hospital and sent me on my way. Herr Weber, who had reminded me that I was not alone in my fear. Sophia and her friends, who had given me warmth and gloves and directions. Ernst and Helga, who had shared their soup and their bicycle and their wisdom. The family on the road, who had shown me that kindness is a chain, passing from one person to the next. Father Richter and Frau Mueller, who had opened the church doors and reminded me that I was never truly alone. Each of them had carried me a little farther. Each of them had given me a piece of their strength, their hope, their love. And now, as I walked the final steps toward my mother's house, I carried all of them with me. I was not walking alone. I had never been walking alone. The darkness was full of light, the light of every person who had reached out a hand, offered a word, shared what they had. My father had spent his life keeping the lights on for others. Now I understood what that really meant. It was not just about electricity. It was about connection. It was about being the light for someone else, even when you were walking in darkness yourself. The lane curved gently to the right, and there it was. The farmhouse. My mother's farmhouse. My grandmother's farmhouse. The place where I had learned to walk, to speak, to love. The place where I had run to my mother with skinned knees and broken hearts, and she had held me and told me that everything would be all right. It stood at the end of the lane, a dark shape against the slightly lighter sky. The windows were dark, of course they were dark, and I could not see any smoke rising from the chimney. But it was there, it was real, I had made it. I stopped at the gate, the same gate I had pushed open 1,000 times, and I let myself breathe, just breathe. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean, and I felt something inside me finally rest. For a moment, I was afraid to go further, afraid of what I might find inside. My mother, cold and confused, perhaps hurt, perhaps worse. The fear had been with me all night, but I had kept it at bay, refused to let it overwhelm me. Now, standing at the gate, I felt it surge up, a wave of terror that threatened to sweep me away. What if I was too late? What if she had forgotten the fire, forgotten to stay warm, forgotten everything that mattered? What if she was already gone, and I had walked 40 kilometers through the darkness for nothing? I gripped the gate, my hands trembling, not from the cold this time, from fear. And then I saw it. A flicker of light in the kitchen window, barely visible, almost lost in the darkness, but unmistakably there. The candle. She was alive. She had found a candle, or remembered where they were kept, or simply sat down beside one that was already lit. She was alive, and she was waiting. I pushed open the gate and walked up the path to the door. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. My mother had never remembered to lock it, even before the dementia began to take her mind. She believed, as her own mother had believed, that a home should always be open to those who needed it. I pushed the door open slowly, feeling the familiar resistance of the old hinges, the slight scrape of wood against wood. The smell of the house embraced me immediately. Old wood, wool blankets, the faintest trace of my father's pipe tobacco, even after all these years. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of safety, the smell of home. "Mama," I called softly. No answer. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me to keep out the cold. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from the kitchen at the end, the candlelight I had seen from outside. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in blankets, a single candle burning in front of her. For a moment, I simply stood in the doorway, looking at her. She looked so small, so fragile, so different from the strong, capable woman who had raised me. Her hair, once dark like mine, was now completely white, falling in thin wisps around her face. Her hands, folded on the table in front of her, were spotted with age, the veins visible beneath the papery skin. But she was alive. She was breathing. And when she looked up at me, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, a spark of the woman she had been. "Ingrid," she said, her voice thin and uncertain, "is that you?" "Yes, Mama," I said, moving toward her. "It is me. I came as soon as I could." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the confusion in her eyes, the struggle to place me, to remember who I was and what I meant to her. It was a struggle I had seen many times over the past year, and it never got easier. But then something shifted in her face. The confusion faded, replaced by a warmth that I recognized from every hug, every kiss, every moment of comfort she had ever given me. "I knew you would come," she said. "I told your father you would come. He said to wait and you would come." So I felt my throat tighten. "Papa is not here, Mama. He passed away 3 years ago." She shook her head slowly, as if I had said something silly. "He was here earlier. He lit the candle for me so I would not be in the dark. He said you were coming and I should wait." I did not know what to say. My father had been dead for 3 years, but in her mind he was still here, still caring for her, still lighting candles to keep her safe. Perhaps, in a way, he was. Perhaps love does not end with death. Perhaps it lingers in the things we taught each other, in the habits we formed, in the light we left behind. "I am here now," I said, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in mine. Her fingers were cold, but not as cold as I had feared. The blankets had helped. The candle had helped. Something had kept her warm through the long hours of the night. "Are you cold, Mama?" I asked. "A little," she admitted. "The stove went out. I could not remember how to light it." I looked at the wood stove in the corner of the kitchen. It was cold, as I had feared. The fire I had talked her through on the phone must have burned out hours ago. But there was wood stacked beside it and matches in the drawer by the sink. "I will light it now," I said. "You just rest. I am going to take care of everything." She nodded, her eyes drifting closed for a moment. "You are a good daughter, Ingrid. Your father always said so." "He taught me well," I said. I lit the stove the way my father had taught me, the way his father had taught him. Find the kindling. Arrange it carefully, leaving room for air. Strike the match. Hold it to the paper until it catches. Wait, watch, breathe. The fire came to life slowly, reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence. The flames licked at the kindling, then the small logs, then the larger pieces. Within minutes, warmth was radiating from the stove, pushing back the cold that had settled into the old walls. I pulled my mother's chair closer to the fire and tucked the blankets more tightly around her. Then I went to the cupboard and found the bread that Ernst and Helga had given me, still wrapped in its cloth, still fresh, and I sliced it carefully and brought it to her. "Here, Mama," I said. "Some friends gave this to me. They said to give it to you." She looked at the bread with wonder, as if it were something miraculous. "Friends. People I met on the way here. Good people. They helped me reach you." She took a piece of the bread and bit into it slowly, her eyes closing with pleasure. "It is good," she said. "It tastes like home." I sat down beside her, close to the fire, and I let myself breathe. The journey was over. I had made it. She was safe. For a long time, we sat there together in the candlelight, saying nothing, needing nothing. The fire crackled and popped. The warmth spread through the room, and outside, the darkness began, imperceptibly, to lighten. Dawn was coming. She drifted in and out of awareness as the night wore on. Sometimes she knew me, her daughter, Ingrid, the nurse who worked too many nights and worried too much. Sometimes she thought I was her sister, who had died 20 years ago. Sometimes she spoke to my father, as if he were standing right beside her. I did not correct her. I did not try to pull her back to the present, to the reality that was slowly slipping away from her. I simply sat with her, held her hand, listened to her voice. She told me stories I had never heard, about her childhood, about her own mother, about the first time she saw my father at a village dance. Some of the stories made sense, others wandered off into confusion. But I listened to all of them, treasuring each word, knowing that soon even these fragments would be gone. At some point, I found my father's flashlight in my bag and set it on the windowsill, where it could catch the first light of morning. It had carried me through the darkness, just as he had carried it for 30 years before. Now it could rest. "That is your father's light," my mother said, looking at it. Her voice was clearer now, more present. "Yes," I said. "He gave it to me before he passed." She nodded slowly. He always kept it with him. He said it reminded him that even in the darkest night, there is always a way forward. "And that is true," I said. She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers frail but warm. "You are like him, you know, always keeping the light on for others." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "I am trying, Mama, I am trying." "You are succeeding," she said simply. And then she closed her eyes and her breathing slowed and she slept. I watched her sleep as the night turned toward morning. The fire crackled in the stove, the candle burned low, and outside the first pale light began to creep over the hills. I had made it, she was safe. And somewhere out there, the crews were working through the night, restoring power to millions of homes across Europe. But in that moment, in that farmhouse kitchen, none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth of the fire, the sound of her breathing, the knowledge that I had walked through the darkness and found her waiting at the end. Let me tell you what happened next. When the dawn came and the lights returned, and I began to understand what this journey had truly meant. We sat together through the rest of that night, my mother and I. The fire burned steadily in the wood stove, its warmth spreading through the old kitchen like a living thing. I fed it carefully, the way my father had taught me, Not too much at once, not too little. Just enough to keep the flames dancing, to keep the cold at bay. My mother drifted in and out of sleep, her head nodding forward, then lifting again as some dream or memory pulled her back to wakefulness. Each time she woke, she seemed surprised to see me there. And each time I would squeeze her hand and say, "I am here, Mama. I am not going anywhere." Sometime around 3 in the morning, I made tea. The kettle was an old copper one that had belonged to my grandmother, dented and tarnished but still perfectly functional. I filled it with water from the tap. The water still worked, thank God, powered by gravity from the tank in the attic, and set it on the wood stove to heat. While I waited, I looked around the kitchen. It was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, and exactly as it had always been. The same wooden table, scarred by decades of use. The same curtains in the window, faded now from blue to gray. The same photographs on the wall, my parents on their wedding day, me as a baby in my mother's arms, Lena at her first birthday party. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. My mother was not the woman in those photographs anymore. She was not the strong, capable woman who had raised me, who had run this farmhouse with quiet efficiency, who had known the name of every plant in her garden and every neighbor in the village. She was someone else now, someone smaller, frailer, more uncertain. Someone who was slowly slipping away from me, one memory at a time. The kettle began to whistle, a thin, reedy sound that filled the quiet kitchen. I lifted it from the stove and poured the hot water into 2 cups, adding tea leaves from the tin on the counter. The smell of the tea, black tea, strong and bitter, the kind my mother had drunk every day for as long as I could remember, filled the air. I brought the cups to the table and sat down beside her. "Here, Mama," I said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Drink this, it will help." She looked at the tea, then at me, and a small smile crossed her face. "You always take care of me," she said. "You took care of me first," I replied, "for a long time." She nodded slowly, as if remembering. "You were such a small thing when you were born, so small I could hold you in one hand. Your father cried when he saw you. Did I ever tell you that?" "You told me," I said, "many times." "He loved you so much," she continued, her voice distant, dreamy. "He used to sit by your crib at night and watch you sleep. He said he could not believe that something so perfect had come from us." I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the grief that never fully went away. "I miss him, Mama." "He is still here," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He never really left. He is in the walls of this house, in the trees he planted, in you." I did not know if she meant it literally or metaphorically. Perhaps, for her, there was no difference anymore. The boundaries between past and present, between the living and the dead, had grown thin and permeable. "I brought his flashlight with me," I said, nodding toward the windowsill where it sat. "It helped me find my way here." She turned to look at it, her eyes brightening with recognition. "His light, he always kept it with him. He said a lineman never goes anywhere without a light." "He gave it to me before he passed," I said, "so I could find my way in the darkness." She reached out and touched my cheek, her fingers cool and dry. "You have always been good at finding your way, Ingrid. Even when you were small, You always knew which direction to go. Tonight I was not sure, I admitted. There was a moment at a crossroads when I thought I was lost. But you found it, she said. You found the way. I listened, I said, the way Papa taught me. I listened, and the land told me which way to go. She smiled, and for a moment, just a moment, she was fully there. The confusion lifted from her eyes, and I saw her as she had been, as she truly was beneath the fog of her illness. My mother, the woman who had held me when I cried, who had taught me to cook and clean and care for others, who had loved me without condition or limit. He would be so proud of you, she said, walking all that way in the dark for me. I would do it again, I said, 100 times, 1,000. She squeezed my hand, and then her eyes drifted closed again, and she slept. I did not sleep that night. I sat beside her, keeping the fire fed, watching the candle burn down to a stub and then go out. The darkness in the kitchen deepened for a moment, and then I wound my father's flashlight and set it on the table between us, its small beam casting a gentle glow over her sleeping face. I thought about the night I had just lived through. All the people I had met, all the kindness I had received, all the choices I had made, each one leading me closer to this moment, this kitchen, this sleeping woman who was both my mother and a stranger. I thought about Bridget, who had understood without being told what I needed to do. About Herr Weber, who had reminded me that I was not the only one trying to reach someone I loved. About Sophia and her friends, who had opened their door to a stranger and sent her on her way with warmth and hope. I thought about Ernst and Helga, who had lived through power outages before and would live through them again, who had given me their son's bicycle and their own bread without asking for anything in return. About the family on the road, walking through the darkness toward grandparents who had a fireplace. About Father Richter and his church full of candles, full of people helping each other simply because that is what people do. Each of them had given me something, not just physical things, though the gloves and the thermos and the bread and the bicycle had all been essential, but something more. They had given me their faith, their belief that I could make this journey, that I would find my mother, that everything would be all right. And now I was here, and she was safe, and the fire was burning, and the dawn was coming. I had made it. The first gray light of morning crept through the kitchen windows around 6:30. I had not realized how much I missed the light until I saw it. The darkness had been so complete, so total, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to see without a flashlight, to move through a world illuminated by something other than candles and flames. The sky outside was pale and colorless, heavy with clouds that promised more cold but no more rain. The ice on the windows had formed intricate patterns, ferns and feathers etched in frost. Through them, I could see the familiar shapes of the farmyard emerging from the gloom. The barn, the stone wall, the chestnut tree my father had planted when I was born. And then I heard it. A distant hum, so faint at first that I thought I had imagined it. But then it grew louder, steadier, and I realized what it was. The refrigerator. The old white refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen, which had been silent all night, suddenly shuddered to life. Its motor whirred, its compressor clicked, and a small light flickered on inside. The power was back. I stood up slowly, stiffly, my legs aching from the hours of sitting. I walked to the window and looked out at the village below. Lights were appearing. One by one, windows were flickering to life, porch lights, kitchen lights, the warm glow of lamps being turned on by hands that had waited all night for this moment. The street lights along the main road blinked on, casting their orange glow over the frost-covered ground. The darkness was lifting. The world was waking up. I felt a wave of relief so strong that I had to brace myself against the windowsill. It was over. The outage was over. The crews had worked through the night, just as the radio had promised, and now the lights were coming back on across Europe. Behind me, my mother stirred. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "The power is back, Mama," I said. "The lights are on." She blinked, looking around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. The overhead light, I had not even thought to try the switch, was now glowing softly, filling the room with a warm, steady illumination that made the candle and the flashlight seem almost quaint. "Oh," she said, "that is good." I laughed, a small, exhausted laugh that was half relief and half disbelief. "Yes, Mama, that is good." About an hour later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Frau Hartmann, my mother's nearest neighbor, standing on the doorstep. She was a sturdy woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that spoke of decades of hard work on her family's farm. "I came as soon as the light returned," she said. "I wanted to check on your mother. I tried to come last night, but the roads were too icy, and I—" She stopped, staring at me. "Ingrid, is that you? What are you doing here?" "I walked," I said simply. "You walked from Münster in the dark." "I had to," I said. "She was alone." Frau Hartmann looked at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like awe. Then she shook her head slowly and let out a long breath. "Your father would be proud," she said. "He was always the one who went out in storms, who fixed the lines when no one else would. And now here you are doing the same." She stepped inside, bringing with her a basket covered with a cloth. "I brought eggs," she said, "and some bread. I thought your mother might need something fresh." "Thank you," I said. "Would you stay with her for a while? I need to rest." "Of course," she said. "You look exhausted. Go, sleep. I will watch over her." I hesitated, reluctant to leave my mother even now. But my body was screaming for rest, and I knew I could not stay awake much longer. "Thank you," I said again, "for everything." Frau Hartmann smiled. "We look after each other here. That is what neighbors do." I slept in my old bedroom, the room I had slept in as a child and a teenager, the room that still had the same faded wallpaper and the same view of the chestnut tree. The bed was narrow and the mattress was old, but I had never felt anything so comfortable in my life. I slept for 6 hours, dreamless and deep. When I woke, the sun was high in the sky, or as high as it got in November, and the house was filled with the smell of cooking. I found my mother and Frau Hartmann in the kitchen, sitting at the table, eating scrambled eggs and toast. The fire was still burning in the stove, though the electric heating had kicked in as well, and the room was warmer than it had been in hours. "There she is," Frau Hartmann said as I entered, "the hero of the hour." "I am not a hero," I said, sitting down at the table. "I am just a daughter." "That is the same thing," my mother said quietly. I looked at her and she looked back at me, and for a moment there was perfect clarity in her eyes. She knew who I was, she knew what I had done, and she was grateful. "Thank you, Ingrid," she said, "for coming." "Always, Mama," I said, "always." Looking back now, 18 years later, I understand that night differently than I did at the time. When I walked out of the hospital and into the darkness, I thought I was simply trying to reach my mother. I thought the journey was about distance, 40 kilometers of frozen roads and empty fields, a physical challenge to be overcome. But it was more than that. It was a journey into myself, into the parts of me that I had forgotten or never knew existed, into the love that made me brave enough to step into the unknown. My mother lived another 4 years after that night. Good years mostly. We arranged for a caregiver to stay with her during the day, and I visited every weekend, making the drive from Münster in my car. A drive that took 45 minutes in good weather, a drive that I never again took for granted. She slipped further into the fog of her illness, month by month. There were days when she did not know my name, days when she thought I was her sister or her mother or a stranger who had wandered into her house. But there were also days when she was fully present, when we would sit together at the kitchen table, and she would tell me stories about my father, about her childhood, about the life she had lived in that farmhouse. She died in her sleep, in her own bed, in the home where she had been born. I was holding her hand when she went, and in her final moments she looked at me and smiled, and I knew that she recognized me. "My Ingrid," she whispered, "my light." The history books call the blackout of November 2006 a technical failure. They explain that it started with a ship, a cruise ship being moved down the Ems River, and that the power company shut down a high-voltage line to let it pass, and that this caused a cascade of failures across the European grid. They count the numbers: 15 million people without power, dozens of countries affected, billions of euros in economic damage. But I do not remember it that way. I remember the students with their candles and their warmth. I remember Ernst and Helga with their soup and their son's bicycle. I remember the family on the road, walking toward grandparents who had a fireplace. I remember Father Richter and his church full of stranded souls, all helping each other simply because that is what people do. I remember a night when 15 million people discovered what mattered most. Not the lights, not the electricity, not the machines that hum in the background of our lives. What mattered was each other. My father's flashlight sits on my bookshelf now, next to his photograph. Sometimes I pick it up and wind it just to hear the familiar click. It still works. It always works. And when I hold it, I am back on that road, walking toward my mother, carrying the light he gave me. My daughter Lena is grown now, with children of her own. Sometimes I take them to the farmhouse. It belongs to Lena now, a weekend retreat from the city, and I show them the chestnut tree, the stone walls, the lane I walked that night. Tell us the story again, Oma, they say. The story about the night the lights went out. And I tell them, not the version in the history books with its technical explanations and economic analyses, but the real story, the human story, the story of kindness in the darkness, of strangers becoming family, of love that walks 40 kilometers through the cold because it cannot bear to do otherwise. I survived the worst power outage in European history. But more than that, I discovered that even in the deepest darkness, we are never truly without light. The light is in the people who help us. The light is in the choice to keep walking. The light is in the love that makes us brave enough to step into the unknown. And the light, I have learned, never really goes out. That was 18 years ago now. My mother is gone, but the farmhouse still stands. The chestnut tree has grown taller, its branches spreading wide over the garden. The wood stove still works, though Lena has added modern heating for the cold winters. And somewhere in the barn, I am told, Ernst's old bicycle still leans against the wall, its flat tire never repaired, waiting. I have told you this story tonight because I want you to know something. When the lights go out, and they will go out in one way or another for all of us, you are never alone. There will be strangers who offer soup. There will be neighbors who share blankets. There will be people who give you their gloves, their bread, their son's bicycle, asking nothing in return except that you pass the kindness on. And there will be a part of you, braver than you knew, stronger than you imagined, that gets up and keeps walking. You may not feel brave in the moment. I did not feel brave that night. I felt tired and frightened and very, very cold. But I kept walking anyway because someone I loved was waiting for me, and that love was stronger than my fear. That is what I want you to remember as you drift toward sleep tonight. You are capable of more than you know. You are surrounded by more kindness than you see. And even when the darkness seems absolute, there is always light in the people around you, in the love you carry, in the small flame that refuses to go out. So rest now, dear friend. Let go of the day. Let the darkness be soft around you, the way it was soft in that frozen orchard, when the whole world held its breath and the stars came out to remind us that there is always light above the clouds. Your journey today is over. Whatever roads you walked, whatever challenges you faced, you made it here to this moment, to this rest. You are safe, you are warm, and somewhere, someone loves you enough to walk through the dark to find you. I am going to leave you now, but I want you to take one thing with you into your dreams. The light never goes out. It just waits for someone brave enough to carry it. A good night, dear friend. Sleep well, and may your dreams be full of light.